Cool. Week 3 of doing the sort of virtual online, I don't know what it is, talks/lecture series. This week I got a bucket hat because my woolly hat cannot contain my hair. I don't even know how I feel with this bucket hat. But yeah, for the last 2 weeks we've had really interesting people. The first week we had Darren of Trinit come to speak about how he raised investment for his business. Last week we had Riff and we had Danny, who make up the XR Zone creative coders, and they were just talking about what they do, as we describe it, at the imposter syndrome at the intersection of art and technology. And this week, this is week 3, and I've got an amazing individual who you go way, 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 way back. And the individual I have here today is Chrystal King, a former architect student that has pivoted into the world of digital product design and has been in this space for maybe, I say last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, last 4 years.
Or so, and has a lot of experience and has gone through a lot of experiences. So, I asked Chrystal to come and join us online to come just talk about her experience. She has a lovely presentation that she will share after, which kind of speaks about her journey. But Chrystal, thank you so much for coming to the chat today. But who is Chrystal?
Yeah, sure. So Chrystal, who am I? I'm a product designer. I currently work at Depop. I've been doing this for the last 4 years. You've pretty much summed me up in your amazing intro. Before product design, I used to work in the world of architecture. I speak about that a bit in the talk. And I sort of was a student, and then I worked in industry for a bit, and then decided it wasn't quite for me, and switched and went into product design.
And what was your world before architecture? Because you also have a very interesting, you're like one of the most, before social media blew up, you were one of the famous designers on Facebook.
Yeah, sure. So before architecture, I did a lot of graphic design, and I've kind of always done graphic design. And like many, it started with MySpace layouts, Bebo layouts, and things like that, and it kind of just developed over time. And I went on to study graphic design at college, and it came to the time where I had to pick my degree, and I thought I want to do something really, really different. So I picked architecture, and that's how I ended up in architecture. And it was really fun, I'd say, 3 years. And year in industry as well was quite fun as well. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
Cool. Yeah. So let's get the presentation started, because I know that you have a lovely presentation, and I feel like maybe you start from there, and I know, like you said, it was interactive. So I don't know. Maybe at those points you can just hit me up if you want me to say anything, and we can discuss. But yeah, just feel free. And it has a beautiful story that I would like for the world to hear. So yeah, thank you, Chrystal.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Okay, let me get the talk up. Yep, can you see?
Yes, yeah, we can see.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I've already introduced myself. I'm a product designer. I've designed experiences at a few different startups. The first startup that I worked at was one that helped new parents find baby-friendly places. And it was an interesting problem to solve, because as a new parent, you suddenly wonder, can I take my kids to all the places that I love going to? And that product was designed to answer that question. After that, I then worked at another startup that helped employees feel happier at work. And then a more fun startup that streamed live DJ sets to people around the world. So now, currently, as Alex said, I work at Depop. I don't know if anyone's heard of Depop, but for anyone who hasn't, Depop is a fashion marketplace where the next generation buy, sell, and get inspired. I work on the sell part of that experience. And every day at work, I work alongside my team and we spend time collaborating to solve problems and create tools to help Depop sellers run their shops more efficiently and sell more of their stock. And I want to take you through one of my favorite projects so far, where we taught new sellers how to become good sellers right from the beginning of their selling journey. So we noticed a new persona arising in the app as we grew bigger and bigger. Let's call this person Levi. So Levi had heard of Depop through a friend, and his friend told him that he could make quick cash by selling his old clothes. And that sounded amazing to Levi. So he downloaded the app and he started using it when he got back from college. His main goal was to sell his stuff and make cash on Depop. So he got back from college, it was dark outside, and he threw the sweater that he wanted to sell on his bed. He leaned over to take a photo with the flash on, and then he uploaded it to Depop. He's a social native, so when he listed the item, he expected the instant gratification of a comment, or at least a like. But what did he get? He got nothing. He waited a few hours, nothing. A couple of days, still nothing. And slowly, he stopped opening the app. But finally, someone messaged him to buy the sweater. But by then, he'd already deleted the app because he wanted to save space on his phone. So the buyer never got a reply, and Levi, the new seller, never sold his items. And this whole experience left the platform full of inactive shops with lots of unsold inventory. So let's pause for a second and take a step back. If we look at traditional e-commerce, we only really buy stuff online from shops that we trust. And what makes us trust a shop? So it could be brand, could be reputation, having an in real life store, and of course, knowing what they sell. So each of these factors can easily be translated to our platform. So for example, a brand could be a shop name or having a good bio, showing your display picture. Reputation could be buyers leaving you reviews. You could show your online presence outside of Depop and your offline presence by having a link in your bio. And we'd know what you sell by you having good photos and a good description. So our hypothesis was that if we make it easier for users like Levi to show how trustworthy he is, then as a new seller, he'd sell his first item way faster. And that would lead to less abandoned shops like this one. So how did we fix it? Well, we started by asking this question: what makes a good photo? We used 4 machine learning models that analyzed the photos of items that sell fast to work out what truly makes a good photo. And 467,000 images later, we discovered that for items to sell fast, they need to have these 3 things. They need to have, number 1, a range of different photos, modeled both on a person, on a hanger, or even a flat lay. They need to also have close-up shots showing details, and they need to have been shot in natural light. See, new sellers didn't know this, so we analysed their typical user journey and contextually gave them tips on this. So for example, right before they were about to take their first photo, we would show them good examples of photos from real items on the app. We also created an onboarding flow for them to set up their shop before they open it, and it led to a lot less empty shops. Now, this was definitely one of my favourite projects because it involved positive behaviour change and speeding up the evolution from a new seller to a more experienced seller. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about the evolution that we'll inevitably face as user experience designers and what we can do in anticipation. I'm going to talk to you about the future designer. So like Alex mentioned, before I was a product designer, I spent a few years in the world of architecture. I went to architecture school and I worked in the architecture industry. And one of my favorite architects was, and still is, this guy, Thomas Heatherwick. Through looking at his work, you learn that good architects design buildings, but great architects design experiences. They design the way that people move through spaces and how those spaces feel. And as I've progressed in my career in tech, I've noticed a shift in the UX UI design space. And it's that the lines between a spatial So if we think of architects, spatial designers, interior designers, etc., what are they? So they're designers of a space. Fundamentally, they turn nothing into something. They create order, whether that be a path through a space or how that space feels to us. They define these spaces for us and they define our experiences with those spaces. And it's the same in user experience design. As designers, we take concepts and we turn them from ideas to something tangible. And at present, we define mobile and desktop experiences and users path through that digital space and how they interact with it. So if we look at the history of digital design, we've seen design go from a single desktop experience to multiple desktop resolutions, to multiple devices with multiple resolutions, to devices that might not even have a screen, and so on. And as designers, if I reframe this, we've gone from designing single resolution desktop websites to desktop websites for multiple resolutions, to designing websites and apps for multiple devices with multiple resolutions. And now we're starting to design for screenless experiences. And through this evolution, we've learned that people aren't actually addicted to their devices. They get rid of them and they move on to new ones and better ones really easily. And the adoption of voice user interfaces is proof of this, really. But what we do know is they're addicted to the information and the experiences that those devices provide. It's not the device that they're addicted to, it's the information that they get from said device. And once that information can somehow be integrated into their reality, the need for computers, smartphones, and 2D interfaces in general will pretty much disappear. Now, in the design process, as a spatial designer, you're taught that form follows function. This means that when we design spaces, we should think about what it will be used for before considering what it actually will look like. But in the state of design and tech, that's all been disrupted. The function of spaces has been disrupted. Spaces no longer have set functions. Their functions are currently in flux because of things like natural interfaces, particularly augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. These three things are space definers, if you will. They change how we perceive and interact with a space. They have the power to determine what the function of a space will be. So let's pause for a second. I think it's a good time to define augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality. So here's a diagram explaining the differences between the three. Let's start with reality. So that's what we're experiencing now, is real objects in real environments. And then virtual reality, that's virtual objects in a virtual environment. So think of like Oculus Rift, or at the other side end of the scale, maybe like Google Cardboard. Also, let's move on to augmented reality. So that's virtual objects in a physical environment. So these objects are 2D and they're overlaid. So for example, Instagram and Snapchat filters would be a good example of the most accessible types. And then we have mixed reality, or sometimes it's called AR 2.0. And essentially that's a mix of AR and VR. It takes the best of each one to create fully immersive experiences. So instead of 2D overlays, we have 3D virtual objects. People can see and manipulate these objects from different angles, just like they can with VR. So already Tech is beginning to disrupt this space, especially since AR, VR, and mixed reality are things that change or somehow alter our perception of the environment that we're in. And that's both inside and outside of buildings too. So I have this massive canvas in my living room above my fireplace. It really characterizes that space, and without it, it feels like a completely different room. This isn't the canvas, but it's pretty close. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Artsy. So with their app, we can use augmented reality to help us visualize where we want to place art in spaces, like the one that I have in my living room. With their app, you can place it somewhere in a room. You can easily change its position in case you don't like it anymore. You can walk around it, and so on. Now, today this is done through a smartphone, through their app. But with the emergence of screenless devices and more immersive experiences, you begin to wonder, do we even need a physical canvas in the first place? Especially since we now know that people aren't attached to the screens. They're attached to the experiences that they get through the screen, right? So Jack Wilmot spent a week in VR. That's 168 consecutive hours in virtual reality. And he said, after a while, the brain begins to assume the digital is the physical. And the interesting thing was that he thought he'd be doing new things, but he actually found himself doing everything he usually does, just with an updated lens, a virtual overlay. And we're already seeing this with tools like the Magic Leap 1. It does a similar thing, and it weighs the same as most headphones. That's almost lighter than your smartphone. And through overlays, it uses mixed reality to define a space and bring it to life. The best thing is that as a user, I'm no longer limited to the decor that's physically available to me. If I want a rocket in my room, I can have one. It's really interesting because its existence supports the idea that as adoption increases for these devices, digital product designers like us will eventually be defining what a space is with our UI designs through things like mixed reality and overlays. In the e-commerce space, designers are creating 3D holograms, and they're using the same gestures that we use on our smartphones. You can see it in this video. You see, you can zoom in with your fist. And it doesn't stop at interior spaces. Currently, we all use Google Maps or Waze as a sat nav to get us from A to B, and it usually does a good job of getting us on the fastest route possible. The Navion is the first holographic AR navigation system for cars. It sits in your car and projects directions onto the street. It's gesture enabled, which means that the driver can switch routes without even experience design. It goes beyond screens because in the future, no one's going to want the iPhone 40. And as designers, we most likely won't be designing for iOS and Android. The future is screenless, and it's already happening. In the auto industry especially, they've tried to tackle dashboards in the past. And they've ended up with the same problem that we have with our remote controls. They're way too complex and unintuitive. You know, aside from the red button and the volume buttons, no one knows what the rest do. The American Automotive Association did a study, and they actually found that these infotainment systems are really distracting and even dangerous at times. They were investigating the time that drivers' eyes spend away from the road and the mental demand that tasks require when using these dashboard systems. It turns out they require a lot of mental demand. So that's really no surprise, especially when we consider how much attention is needed to drive and how quickly a distraction could cause a car accident. When we do that, it then becomes really important and very necessary that the future is screenless. But imagine the same technology and principles without the need of a smartphone or a device. Imagine a step further where we live in a world where our cities and environments can be adapted by having a habitual overlay resting on top of them. And because of this, maybe we no longer need physical signage on roads. Instead of road signage, Instead, road signage will be applied as a digital layer, navigating us around roads free flow. It sounds like a world with less accidents and traffic too. So what that means is, in the near future, as user experience designers and product designers, we'll inevitably transition into roles where we define spaces and environments. Maybe 10 years ago, this would have been the job of a traditional town or city planner, but today, most likely we, as designers, will be the ones crafting these experiences. Now, this might seem intimidating, and I guess it brings us to the question, how might we prepare for the shift? But the first thing we can do is stay adaptable. The second is stay empathetic. The third, stay creative. Fourth, stay storytelling. And fifth, stay collaborative. So, stay adaptable. As an experienced designer, we're constantly on our toes, ready to pivot. And that might be based off a tech constraint that's just been discovered, or perhaps there's been a rotation of team members. Our designs also need to flex for different users and their ever-changing needs. They need to be accessible. So being adaptable means framing change in a different way. It means looking at change as an enabler to push the boundary for the experience that you're crafting. It's something that we as user experience designers are no stranger to. So the next point was to stay empathetic. So last year, 2019, we saw a wave of concern arise around design ethics, and it was definitely to be expected. In the past, user experience design has abused psychological vulnerabilities like loss aversion to get users to forget the task that they actually want to do and instead do what businesses want them to do. And we designers allowed it to happen. One of the ways it started was with this, the notification badge. Red incites urgency. Red is the universal color for stop signs, for warnings, and it does the same thing to us. It tells us stop your work or whatever you're doing and pay attention to me. And we also have shorter reaction times to primary colors compared to secondary colors. So ultimately, it's a psychological trigger, very similar to the ones that Pavlov was using to train his dogs in the infamous Pavlov experiment. And then it developed to this, commonly seen on hotel booking sites, where we use loss aversion and the feeling of missing out to increase the sales of hotel rooms. In 2014, Hooked came out and revolutionized the industry. It talks about how to design products like this on purpose. And us designers bought into it. But we're in better days now, where we're discussing how we can amend our mistakes, which is exactly what this book, Ruined by Design, talks about. Another thing we can do to increase our empathy is admit that edge cases don't exist. Edge cases are extreme scenarios that may not face the majority of users, so we don't spend time designing for those experiences. An example would be you're designing the Smart Compose feature for Google, and you notice that when people write something like, "I'm meeting an investor," the AI assumes that the investor is a man and suggests, "Would you like to meet him?" So dismissing it as an edge case would mean saying something like, "Well, most investors are male, so it's not that bad." But fortunately, Google didn't do that, and they're actually working to fix this. And at Depop, when designing a product for over 10 million users, an edge case that doesn't affect 90% of users still affects 1 million people. And that's double the population of Luxembourg. So again, it's important to remember edge cases don't exist, especially when designing at scale. It might seem tedious at the time, but the person experiencing your product will thank you for it. So the next point was to stay creative. The strongest currency in today's society has become ideas. It's no longer about how fast you can deliver to a deadline. These things are also great, but they can make you a commodity, that can be replaced by someone who's faster and cheaper. It's your ability to come up with innovative ideas that will set you apart and make you essential. And that's why it's massively important to continuously invest in your creativity. Think about creativity like connecting the dots. It's how we connect the dots that differentiates us, just like any skill. With practice, we can train ourselves to connect the dots in faster and in new ways. So you invest in your creativity by watching your taste. Your creativity can only be as strong as your taste. Why? Because the ideas we come up with are fueled by what we consume. This means that without quality sources being fed into you, you can't produce good ideas. So I really like this quote from Dreams of Sushi, where Jiro Ono is talking to a young chef and he says, "In order to make delicious food, you must eat delicious food. One must develop a palate capable of discerning good and bad. Without good taste, you can't make good food."
Sorry, I don't understand, but I found something similar.
So
Do you want to know what is the difference?
you build up and refine your taste by immersing yourself in the best pieces of innovation. Look at how other people connect the dots in completely different areas. This means venturing outside of your field and watching the best film. We also need to see the potential in everything.
Looks like there's a problem.
So Noah Scaling has a wide range of different exercises to prompt creativity in his book, Unstuck. One of them being the Doodle Dandy. I like this one in particular because it helps you visualize what doesn't yet exist and see the potential in everything. So here's what you do. You get a Sharpie and you make a random squiggle on a paper, and then you transform that squiggle so it visually expresses a particular phrase. It doesn't have to be literal, it could be completely abstract. So this was supposed to be the interactive part of the presentation. So maybe you can get a Sharpie at home and try and do the exercise. The phrase would be the art of noise. So another exercise you can do is called Think Fast. And it's where you pick a random brand and product, and then you ask yourself why the brand would be selling the product. And you'll end up with a weird, awkward juxtaposition, and this is a good thing. So for example, why would Nike be selling toothbrushes? So give yourself a couple of minutes to brainstorm why Nike could be selling toothbrushes, and then a couple more minutes to pitch it. And then once you're done, analyze how you came to a particular solution and why you made certain connections. So for example, Nike, they believe in athleticism. They refer to people as athletes. You know, as a company, they believe in being the best in every part of your life, including your dental hygiene. So they're selling toothbrushes to reinforce this message. I'm sure you can come up with much better ones. So I was going to do this exercise as well. This is another interactive one where I've got two wheels here. I mean, feel free to pick a brand off one of the wheels and an object, and then brainstorm for 5 minutes and then pitch it and analyze how you created certain connections and how you connected the dots. So the next point we have is stage storytelling. So in architecture, the structural integrity of some of the tallest buildings rely on some of the smallest components. In the same breath, it's important to focus on even the tiniest details in experience design. And I don't mean pixel pushing and getting the perfect drop shadow on your button. I mean making sure that your users have a completely thought through experience. The best designs come from strong narratives and strong concepts. So let's start by looking at strong narratives. A good way to develop a strong narrative is to storyboard an experience. In the early days of Airbnb, the founders mapped out the entire experience. They started out with a list of emotional moments that make up the full Airbnb experience, which then evolved into stories shared around the company. And then they hired an animator from Disney's Pixar to bring the storyboard to life, and it soon became a roadmap for their company. They wanted to really drive a design process based off of storytelling, so they mapped out what a trip of a lifetime would be like. And Brian Chesky, co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, described it as the 11-star experience. And that later formed Airbnb Trips. So let's tackle the second part, strong concepts. Solid concepts at the beginning of a design process really help to create a strong design. It creates alignment and guides the interaction, the relationship between elements, the tone of voice, the motion design, and so on. Think of concepts as metaphors that we designers use to help people understand how something will work. Take Tinder, for example. The concept behind it was that the user is holding a deck of cards and they're splitting those cards into two groups, the chosen versus discarded. So it's like chosen, 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 discarded, chosen, chosen, discarded, discarded, chosen, discarded. Now that concept has defined the swipe right and swipe left gestures and different interactions in the app. Finally, the last point is to stay collaborating or stay collaborative. So I want to show you this building. It's really nice. You know, it's got some really nice lighting outside. Here's what it looks like at night. It's amazing, right? Oh, and by the way, just so you know, it's a preschool. So I asked people what they think about this building, and we're going to play a game. I want you to try and guess whether the person who made the comment that I'm about to show you is a designer or not. So, I mean, if we were with each other in person, I would ask you to stand up if you thought that a designer said it. And if you think a non-designer said it, then you could stay seated. So here's the first quote. It looks like a different building from every angle. It's good, gives it variety. Do you think a designer said it or a non-designer said it? Designer. I kind of feel like the countdown music should be playing in the background. But anyways, okay, the design is bold, I love it, but the ceilings look really high and children are so tiny. Designer or non-designer? Non-designer. Okay, next one is, it must have cost a fortune, probably an expensive preschool. Who do you think said it? Do you think a designer said it or a non-designer said it? A non-designer. The texture reminds me of the Guggenheim. Is this a designer or is it a non-designer? Non-designer. This is the one that always gets people. So here we have all sorts of comments. We have comments on scale. You know, the design is bold, I love it, but the ceilings look really high and children are so tiny. Perception, it must have cost a fortune, probably an expensive preschool. And form, and if we didn't ask these people, maybe we wouldn't have got feedback on these things. You see, as designers, we can identify really well when something goes against a common pattern, and we're great at empathizing on behalf of users, but we're limited in that we can't consider everything from every angle. And I don't think we should. Getting feedback is one of the easiest ways to collaborate, and it's super important that we get feedback from non-designers and people outside of tech. So here are the points again. Stay adaptable. And that's because as designers, this is the stuff we're doing every day. So in essence, don't prepare, keep doing what you're doing. See, I love this tweet. It says, what if, hear me out, we are the design tools. And it's basically saying that no matter what comes next in the design scene, we will adapt and progress because we aren't defined by the software that we use. It's our mind and our concepts that are the assets. And personally, I'm looking forward to a more screenless future if it means less of this. Thank you. That's the end of my talk.
Amazing, amazing. Wow. Is that you, Chrystal? Yeah. Oh, that's really lovely. Nice that you took us through. They look like the companies you worked for, and obviously you talking about what you're working on in Depop, and obviously now your thoughts. And I remember the original aspect of this talk. Has this talk evolved from the first time? So I asked Chrystal once to give a talk about designing beyond the interface, beyond the screen, and how we can prepare like future designers to be able to think about this screen interface. Like for example, right now us working at home, all we're doing is being confined by our screens, and that must have some sort of I don't know, health detriment
Yeah.
to this period of time. And so, and it's really interesting when you touch on that future designer. I'm probably going to come to that. What I'm going to go back to is start from the beginning of your presentation, which was about, obviously you studied in architecture, you did a year in industry, and if I remember,
Hmm.
you did a year in France. I didn't,
Yeah.
and I
Paris.
remember coming to link up with you after you came back from France. But
Yeah.
talk to me about, obviously you spent 3 years looking at, you're gonna study architecture. Where did you study again?
I studied at the University of Nottingham.
Okay, I forgot about that. But you studied there for 3 years. You made this
Yeah.
ambition. You had this vision that you were going to go the full 7 years as an architect,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you do 3 years, 1 year in industry, and then you say, "Whoa, I can't do this thing." And
Right.
I don't know if you remember how you feel at that period of time.
Yeah, I
Like,
remember
what
it like
was?
it was yesterday.
Yeah.
So my dream was always to live and to work in Paris. That was everything that I wanted to do. I wanted to that was just my dream. So when I went to Paris and I was working in the industry, it just didn't match up with my expectations. Um, in in architecture school, you're sort of taught to visualize and dream up the craziest structures and you know the most the wildest concepts and buildings and stuff like that. But when in industry, it's I think a lot of the times it's completely different. Well, my based on my experience, it was completely different, and it was very rigid. It's not like tech where you build something and you see the results in a sprint, so 2 weeks. You end up seeing it in years and years after you design it, and with tech you get instant feedback, whereas with architecture you really don't get that feedback until people are living and using the spaces and things like that. And oftentimes that can be too late. So it just didn't feel like I just didn't really feel like I wanted to be in that industry. I wanted something fast paced. I wanted like the depth of thought that goes into like architecture and like designing different buildings and structures and spaces. But I wanted it fast. I wanted to see the results. I wanted it to feel the impact as well a lot faster than like 5 or 6 years. And yeah.
Oh, and so okay, you had that like epiphany, and then you
Hmm.
came back to London, and at that time you were looking for a new vision, a new plan.
Yeah.
And how did that lead you into the world of digital product design? How did you end up, now you're talking to us about the future designer? What was that pivot or that sort of opening?
Sure. So when I first came back from Paris, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I really didn't know. I was like, maybe I'll work as a creative, or like perhaps I'll do set design. I remember really wanting to do set design at one point because it's like a natural sort of move from architecture to like designing sets, designing spaces, that kind of stuff. And even to this day, I think it still is something that's really fun. So yeah, I just tried so many different things. And then someone that I spoke to had been like, "Oh, what about UX design?" And then like someone else had been like, "Oh, UX design," blah, blah. And it just kind of felt like a sign from God that I should just sort of try this UX design thing and see how it goes. So I found a really early stage startup that needed a designer, and I needed experience, and so I started working there.
So at that time, you didn't have a portfolio just yet, or was it through?
No, I didn't have a portfolio as such. I mean,
So
I was learning. I was doing a lot of hustling and doing a lot of learning on the job. I remember being on Coursera and looking at so many online courses for product design, and just teaching myself the stuff that I'd learned so that I could, you know, create these visuals for this app.
and what would you say? Because if you think of it, the digital product design process is not only about the visual execution. There's also a lot of that process, that strategic thinking, that user research, that getting getting those insights, those like aspects of wireframing and information architecture. And where would you say in your journey where you felt that you had to learn those things? Because I'm guessing, right, you were very fresh out of architecture, because you could design, you had an opportunity open up for you at a startup that, was a small startup, and you were initially the first designer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so where did you, because it seems like even your design style eventually changed or evolved as well.
Yeah, of course. Design styles are always going to evolve as well, as time progresses. What was the
Begin to develop that process, like that actual
like
product,
my personal
digital product.
design process?
Yeah. That like.
Oh, I see. I think I wouldn't even say that my personal design process is solidified as we're speaking now. It definitely changes depending on what the project is. There's certain things that you skip, and that depends on multiple factors like time constraints, technical constraints. You kind of, I think I have this set of tools with me that is like user research and competitor analysis, ideation, and all the different steps that you go through for your design process. And depending on what the project is, I'll pick like 5 of those tools and run with it. But I wouldn't say that it's strict, but I would go with the same set every single time.
And like, talk to me about the sort of transition from what you worked at Baby Point, then you worked at LifeWorks, then you worked at Boiler Room, then you moved into Depop. And what was like, how was that transition for you as a designer, being exposed to, especially where you've been working with mostly startups, and then like, how's that been for you in terms of your like just development as an individual? So yeah, Krista, I want you to think about this because you worked at, you've been working in the space for 4 years,
Yeah.
and you've worked at 4 different companies. And I'm guessing at each company they were all at different sizes, different scales. Obviously, you worked at Depop for a while now, and you've seen, but like, how has all of those things contributed to your like career development as a designer?
Sure. So the first couple of companies, so Baby Point and Boiler Room, definitely sort of taught me how to sort of do lots of different things. Baby Point was quite small, and when you work at small startups, you tend to have to wear many hats. So you dip into so many different types of things. You learn different things. You pick up so many different skills. So that's really what I got from Baby Point. LifeWorks was interesting because the team was centralized, the design team, and so a centralized design team essentially is a team that isn't based in feature teams. So you've got almost like a design team, and they work as an agency and they ship out work and stuff like that. So essentially, I was working in a centralized design team, and that taught me quite a lot. There was a lot of collaboration with different designers, which was really great. Depop though has definitely taught me how to ship at scale. So designing for millions and millions of users. That's definitely what I picked up, as well as designing with data. Because when you do have lots of users, you have a lot of data on like users too, and things like that can really help you make really data informed decisions. So yeah, I'd say Baby Point and Boiler Room were like trying different things, taking the lead a lot in different projects. LifeWorks, being very collaborative with other designers because of the team structure. And then Depop, it's definitely more independent because I'm the only designer in my team, full of engineers and analysts and product managers, as well as designing with data and shipping at scale.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point when you talk about that in regards to just designing with scale, because I think if you think of it, like when I first started this journey, in my head, it was like to go work for like one of the big names, one of the big tech companies, go work there, go work as a designer or, prototype or whatever. And I remember like people were like, the bigger the company it gets, the less maybe as a designer you actually design, and it becomes more process, less creativity. And my question to you now is like, how do you maintain that aspect of creativity as the company gets bigger? And like you said, now you're not maybe taking as much risk as before, or maybe data plays a role in how
Yeah.
you lead a creative decision, and how do you maintain that sort of like that that tension point between data and creativity?
Mm. So I think working at a scale up like Depop actually forces you to be more creative because there are way more constraints than working at a place like Point, where you almost have free reign, as a designer, because nothing's really been set in stone yet. Um, you know, so I think you're kind of forced to be way more creative because you have to work with design systems that already exist. You have to sort of think about how can I change this, but not too much that users aren't completely confused by it, and but enough that it feels like an improvement and things like that. So I do think it causes you to be more creative. There was a second part to your question. What was the second part?
And like that point between creativity, like where you're now being a bit more data led,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes how does that decision that when you got the data says this but your creative mind says that, and then you're like at that there's two tension points between like what
Yeah,
direction we should go and stuff.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think user testing and actually like sitting down with users is really important. Um, I'd say it's more important than like your creativity because your creativity can lead you to design something that is just not usable. And also, like when you see like data gives you like the quantitative, but it doesn't give you the why things are happening. It might tell you that like lots of people are doing this, but it doesn't tell you why, and that can be really misleading if you take data just as it is. You really need to just probe that little bit further and use that to like maybe talk to some users and understand the why, and that kind of unlocks the tension and the loggerheads that are created by data, creativity, and user testing.
So you said you're the only designer in your team, and obviously I know that Depop got a lot of designers as well, but like, so how do you how does that work in terms of like being able to like, I don't know, rip off ideas with other designers and stuff? Is it like you got like distributed, like is the office space more like scattered, or is it like very much team based? You sit in the team. How does it work when you're trying to maybe like ideate some ideas with maybe other designers?
So it's actually really interesting because when I first joined Depop, it was definitely more centralized than embedded, which is what we're at now. The designers sat together. It was a small company though as well. It wasn't as big as it is today. We didn't have that like massive office. Whereas today, completely different. I've seen it grow to so, you have to be very intentional about collaborating, and you kind of it's kind of on you to sort of grab someone and be like, hey, I want to collaborate. You have to be, I can't think of the right word for it, but you just, for now, let's say intentional for lack of a better word, but you have to be very intentional when you're talking to other designers in your team. We also have like structural things in place to help us collaborate more. So weekly meetings, we have stand-ups. Because if someone's working, for example, I'm on the sellers team, so I work on seller-related tools and stuff, and I mentioned that in the talk. But someone might be working on something that might overlap my work. That actually happened today, where I'm working on something that overlaps someone else's piece of work. So tomorrow I've put in a brainstorming session. If we're in the office, we'd stand around a whiteboard, but it's going to be really interesting to see how we're going to facilitate this tomorrow. But yeah, that's how it works. You just have to be really intentional. I don't feel, I think you can try and put in as many meetings as you want, but I think the best sort of route is you telling someone like, oh, let's collaborate, or let's go and get a coffee and talk about design and stuff like that.
And what does it feel like working at a cool company like Depop? Because it's obviously a cool company, it's a cool brand.
You know what? The coolest thing about Depop is its users. Always. Last year I went to New York. Last summer I went to New York to do some user research, and I ended up going the day after. Well, I ended up going on my birthday, like flying out on my birthday to New York, and I went to flea markets, and I was like doing a day in the life of a seller. I did so many user interviews, and that was just so much fun. I think our community is so unique and diverse and individual that you don't really meet two of the same people, you know. So I think that's the coolest thing about working at Depop, the people that use Depop. Because I've worked at companies where you don't really have the user base, or like, you know, they don't really have a sort of community that you can test with, and you end up putting out designs that don't resonate with the community, and you know, it's just not the ideal experience. So when you have a community that is so receptive and so passionate about, you know, the app that you're designing, it's just amazing.
And so, yeah, you know, now we've obviously touched on the early stage and we touched on your Depop experience. Now, I want to touch on your future designer part, which I thought was really lovely, really interesting. And obviously, you know, you're a designer that's, you know, you were trained from a spatial thinking, from a 3D perspective, and you've also done a lot of work with 2D. And I think this also why I like the future designer part, because I think it kind of works well with most of my students. Most of my students, they study creative computing, and some of them may be coming from, I think they study in a diploma, so they're like 1 year sandwich in like understanding the worlds of creative computing. But you know, these students, some of them come from like graphic design, 3D design, like a
Amazing.
bunch of fine art. Like nobody counts like all kinds of experiences. Sometimes I get asked questions like, "How can I exist as a designer if I'm an artist, for example?" And like, you know, and I just wanted you to touch on that, because I'm guessing the future designer isn't like you said. It wasn't about the type of software that you use. It's about hair. It's about, you know, the way you think. And I wanted you to touch on that just slightly, like, you know, about the way we think and how that contributes to the things that we design.
I think that that's a good question. I think that ultimately, like inevitably, what we put out is a reflection of everything that's inside of us, you know. And it's just interesting because user experience design as a field is just so diverse. Like you have people that have come from like being a personal trainer to someone else who's come from like, I've come from architecture. You have people who come from like dance, like finance, so many different fields. And it's interesting because every day that you work alongside these people, you see their perspective in the designs that they produce, and that's another reason why it's good to have diverse teams. You know, diverse in terms of like people coming from different walks of life, because you really see it in the end result, because our experiences shape us, and ultimately that shapes the designs that come out of us too.
And as a black woman working in, you know, this industry, in this field,
Yeah,
where, you know, maybe I don't know, would you would you I don't want to say that thing like, there's not many of you. That I feel like that's like a BS. But like, you know, there isn't a lot of, you know, Crystal Kings around. Um, how do you sort of try to start making those steps in order to contribute to, you know, more designers who can contribute to the future of design that look like you or come from similar experiences like you?
yeah, it's interesting because like tech wasn't that diverse when I came into tech at all. But I remember seeing Chrystal King, you know, from Spotify. I think she's on Netflix.
Yeah, I think she's at Netflix. I think so. I might be wrong as well.
You know, it helps to see someone who looks like you and stuff. And you know, you might not think how you might not see how necessary that is until it happens to you, and you see someone who actually is like a person of color in a or black woman in a really high role. You know, she's like I think she's like director level, and that's super inspirational. You know, even if I don't end up being a product designer for the rest of my life, just to see someone like that who's in that position, super inspirational.
Yeah, and in the case for anybody who missed that, Chrystal was talking about Chrystal King, who was at Spotify, but is now the vice president of creative production at Netflix. And yeah, and like Chrystal, you talk about the future of design, and the question is, you know, the skill set as well. What is the skill set? Because I know you talk about like it's actually the thinking process of a designer, but a designer also has to have that particular skill set to exist in that future. You know, if you're working with interfaces or screenless interfaces or all of this it creates you need to be a multifaceted, you know, designer. You
Yeah,
need to be able to have the competency to throw yourself in the deep end and feel comfortable with new technology that you may not have any, being able to play around with that. And what would you say those skill sets are for that future designer?
you know what? I think it goes back to the first point I made about staying adaptable. It's definitely the future designer is definitely less about being a specialist, in my opinion. I think it's more about being a generalist and toying around and playing around with things, you know, dabbling in Unity, like just getting stuck in and learning things, you know, not being afraid to like jump into new programs, like learning how to code if you want to. Although, yeah, I don't like, I think that I don't like, I'm also a believer of not everyone needs to code. You know, some of us just need to like think, you know, come up with ideas, ideate. So, yeah, does that answer the
Yeah,
question?
I think that answers my question. I think I learned to code personally because because I wanted to actually art bring things to life in a way that maybe I can control the variables, parameters, everything about it. So that's where I learned to code, where and then had that design ability, and then it was like, okay, I want to design and code, and having that ability which I felt maybe pushed my work, my ability further. And since then, I've tried to encourage designers to have to be open to this aspect of being multifaceted and having particular skills. And with yourself moving forward in the future, will we be seeing like more like physical, digital, projects coming from you, or side projects, or would you be looking at exploring that even further?
Yeah, personally, I'm really interested in like installations. I've always been interested in installations and just pieces that people can interact with, and the interstitial between tech and physical spaces and things like that. You know, how do we bring tech to e-commerce, but fit like in real life e-commerce, so like stores and stuff like that. You see different examples. You know, in my local Asda, they have holograms. Is super interesting. So if you do see stuff from me, it's likely to be that kind of stuff.
And where do you seek your design inspiration? At this period of time, where do you seek inspiration from?
Interesting question. I think it comes from like anywhere and everywhere. It's not really like a set place or a set website. It's just like exposing yourself. And I'm a great believer in that you subconsciously absorb all this stuff and it comes out in ways that you can't really track or think of and stuff like that. But you just subconsciously absorb it. I think there's like Steve Jobs is like say every time I say this, someone's like, oh yeah, that's what Steve Jobs said. But I think that you absorb all this stuff and it comes out in different ways, and that's how you get inspiration. But if you're like stuck, then perhaps like websites. I love Design. Design is amazing. I can't really pin it down to a single website though, because I just think that if you just expose yourself to so many different things, it's just way better than scrolling a website.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And what would you say is, I don't know, any final thing you want to share with the future designers of tomorrow who come from unconventional backgrounds and want to, be in this world or want to play a big role in shaping the experiences of tomorrow?
I would say that your unconventional background is an asset rather than something that could limit you. It's something that will make you individual, and it sort of makes sure that your perspective is your perspective and not everyone else's. So I'd say that you shouldn't worry about your background or where you've come from, because ultimately that's that's a benefit rather than a con.
Cool. Well, Chrystal, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your knowledge.
Thanks.
I really appreciate this so much. The original OG, Chrystal King. But yeah, where could people keep track of or keep follow you, follow your journey, follow your progress?
Sure. So these days I spend a lot of time on Twitter. It's Chris King on Twitter for now. CH.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chrystal.
Thanks for having me.